Welcome back
Hi.
to another episode of Ask Gardenstead. We have a very special guest today. We have Darryl Chang from Houseplant Journal. You may know of him and his awesome Instagram account.
Yes.
He's even more awesome
He's
in
like
person.
the houseplant genius.
Oh.
Like, I thought I was good, but then he'll tell me things that I'm like, I don't even think of that. That's a whole other level of knowledge.
So what's really cool is that we're going to get him to answer some questions from you guys.
Mm-hmm.
So without further ado,
Dun dun dun.
the first question is...
So my plants look dry sometimes, and I end up overwatering them. How can I save them?
It's like a statement that's so general. I don't even understand how to begin. Like I would
Right,
need to.
what plant it
What plant it
is.
is? What are you talking about? Dry? Like is it the leaf that is browning, or is it that you're looking at the soil and it's like cracked and all super dry? It's just so general.
Yes.
It's hard to say.
So I'm wondering if it's the foliage looks dry,
Yeah, in which case,
but then she ends up overwatering them. How can I save them? So my assumption is to, whatever plant it is, teach the person to start really observing the soil more.
Yeah. Well, actually, I would probably even start with. Well, first, where is your plant? Is it far away from your windows? Is it right up against them? Right? So depending on that, then I know whether they have satisfied the requirement first for light, right?
Yeah.
So let's assume that, yes, it's in front of the window, right? Then the next thing we have to look at is, okay, which parts are the dry parts? If it's the oldest leaf that has a few brown tips, then I say, don't worry about it, right?
Yeah.
But then the next part of the question, which is I end up overwatering them. So when we say overwater, are we saying that like a few weeks later the plant has root rot and the whole thing's dead? Then in that case, the thing is we always have to be watering whenever the soil reaches a certain dryness. And it's always we should always think of it as a strategy of watering and not a schedule, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's really hard to give a final answer on this, right? But,
I thought of what you said a little while ago. I wonder if it's a dustier plant. Even just wiping off all of the leaves with a damp cloth might help with the photosynthesis, might help just give new life.
So without knowing what type of plant this is and where it's located in your home, I would say start with giving the foliage a bit of a wipe down, move it closer to the light if you can, and really observe the soil over time usually if you're overwatering, stop watering for a bit and observe the plant and let it dry out a little bit.
Yeah.
And
write back. Give us more information so we can better help you.
Well, to be fair, I think this format of the Instagram doesn't allow you to send a picture, right?
yes.
Yeah.
So, I think a picture would probably say 1,000 words to help us, right?
Which is a good point because this is our first Instagram question.
Oh, really?
And usually we have Facebook questions from our very active Gardenstead Facebook groups.
Yes.
So we'll ask for more
Send us
pictures
a send us a
on
photo.
Instagram.
Wendy sends us this question, and I'm excited for the answer too because I have a similar plant. Help! In one day, her leaves have turned more brown. Should I repot? I don't want her to die. So this is a fiddle leaf fig,
Which I don't even attempt to grow anymore.
Really? Why?
I think they're too finicky. They're too high maintenance for my level of exertion of taking care of my plants.
Oh, I don't find them high maintenance.
Okay.
But I've only had one, and it's grown very well in low light. It doesn't get direct sunlight. It's close to a window in my office, and it's doubled in size. So not a ton of leaves. Like, it's not a really bushy one, but it seems quite happy. But please answer.
So I think, actually speaking to the plant, how many years have you had this fiddle leaf?
3.
3, yeah. So I think one really important thing to understand with plants is that they're only going to hold on to the number of leaves that is in balance with the total light that it gets and also with assuming that you're able to water in the correct strategy, right?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that you are doing that. So that's why, like you said, it's not as bushy, right?
Can I interrupt? So
Yeah.
I'll tell you when I water.
Yeah.
I can tell the leaves start to fall, lean down, and that's the only time I water it.
Yeah, and so
It doesn't need a lot of water.
Right, that's exactly the right way to do it. It's like you want to look for the cue that says now is the time to water.
Perfect.
It's like you say, it's like you fill up the gas in your car. Even if I told you I fill it up once a week, you understand that it's not because I just have to fill it once a week. It's because I use the car to a certain degree and it gets to whatever the needle gets to a quarter or something, and then now it's time, right?
Yeah.
So the strategy with watering a plant has to be based on observation. So exactly like you said, fiddle leaves, they droop their leaves a little bit. Pothos also droop. Peace lilies droop. And then if they droop a lot, it's like, okay, really now it's time to water, right?
That is an excellent analogy, the gas tank.
Yeah, totally.
And it, again, brings it back to observation. Just really watch your plants.
Yeah.
Pay attention to, they do change. They're in fluctuation constantly. So really learn the need of your plant through watching.
My plants always do better when I forget to water, because I think I overwater sometimes.
So my mom calls that feast and famine watering.
Yeah.
And she's somewhat trained her plants into just her schedule. So they've adapted over years. She's had her jade plants for 20 some years.
Yeah.
And it just all it works. Their
It's
system
better
works.
to underwater, I think, because they'll visibly tell you that they need more water. But if you're overwatering, you usually only realize that you've overwatered until it's too late and it's rotted. Yeah.
So also going back to Wendy's question, your assumption, I believe, should not always be to just repot. That shouldn't be where your brain jumps to if something's not doing well.
It's weird because a lot of people ask us that, and that is not where my brain goes. I rarely repot.
Yes, I
So I'm kind of like that. I don't know who's telling these people to repot their plants all the time.
Well, I think it just comes from a mindset that here's something that I'm seeing that I don't like, right? And I think, therefore, I must take some sort of drastic action. But when I look at whenever I look at plants, I realize that brown spots, yellowing, this process has been set in motion weeks ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's now the unfortunate thing with brown tips, for example, is that it has to do with the leaf transpiring a lot, and when it transpires, what it's doing is it's letting water evaporate out of its pores, right?
Okay.
And in our water is not pure distilled water. It's got stuff in it, and there's some stuff that you just cannot get rid of. And older leaves will naturally just kind of bear the marks of having worked and evaporated water.
Yeah.
Because the plant looks very, very healthy. And my fiddle leaf fig does that all the time. It gets...
A couple of spots here and there.
I just think it's natural shedding of skin. Sometimes the older leaves get brown and fall off to make space for newer leaves. And I think that's a normal... just from your photo, the whole plant looks very healthy. So I really wouldn't worry about that one leaf.
So I would leave as is.
Yeah, I would leave it.
So one of our questions from our from Instagram was, are orchids meant to last forever? So orchids, I really don't know anything about, but we can talk about this in terms of plant lifespan as well.
Yes. So one of the things that I always talk about is what is your perspective of owning this plant? If I only cared about this thing being a piece of decor, then obviously when the flower itself from an orchid falls back and dies, then some people will look at the set of leaves and they just throw that away, right? And it's sad, but at the same time it speaks to how sorry, am I uncovering some skeletons here?
I'm very sensitive.
but I'm saying that we have to understand what is our mindset when we want this plant, right? So when this person says, are orchids meant to last forever? If you ask me, is it going to have a flower on it forever? No, absolutely not. But are those leaves that keep growing, can that last forever? I would say you can get orchids to last you several years, up to a decade even.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the thing is, you're not always going to have a flower on it, and you will need to be repotting that orchid every maybe a year or so.
Yeah.
And ensuring that it's sitting in a spot, getting a good view of the sky. All these things are what will... all these things boil down to somebody just anecdotally telling someone, oh yeah, mine's lasted for several years, right? But we really need to get into the nitty-gritty of exactly what the details are of this, the life of this orchid.
Yeah, and
right?
the orchid as singular, it's where it is in every different situation,
Yes.
every different
Yeah,
house.
I think that people don't realize though that like flowers don't last very long.
Yeah.
But plants last very long. So it's very normal for if your plant flowers, for the flowers not to last very long, but it doesn't mean that the plant is dead and done.
Yeah.
It's just a process of the plant going through its life cycle is that it flowers.
Yeah.
Um,
Another one, for example, is peace lily. Like, people, whenever you go to a store, you will never find a peace lily at the store that doesn't have several of those nice white blooms, right?
Yeah.
But then, I mean, is that setting the expectation that it should always have them? Sometimes it is, and people, when they see it, oh, my peace lily is turning green, it's turning brown, like the flower, and I'm like, yeah, it'll last you a few weeks and then it's gone.
yeah.
And then, like, I had a peace lily now for a good 4 or 5 years. It doesn't always have a flower on it, but
Yeah.
it has continually pushed out new flowers over the years that I've had it.
Yes.
And that's, to me, like, the reason that I own this plant is because I like it to grow with me.
Yes.
Oh, that's a nice thought. Okay, so we have a question from Kathy. She said, "Help! Why is it turning yellow?"
It's actually
good.
it's actually that the plant has programmed all those cells to give up their nitrogen and send it back into the roots to shoot up into new growth. Now that's the normal way that, like, that's why you see older leaves turning yellow.
Oh.
However, it is also possible that, because when I see yellowing in such a global way, like almost like a lot of these leaves are doing that, I would also, look towards the soil and see, is this person perhaps not checking the soil before they water, and maybe there's a bunch of roots in there that have rotted.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Kathy, what I would do is I would pull the plant out and
Yeah.
take a look at the roots. Usually white roots are healthy roots.
Yeah, white and firm are the healthy roots.
Yep, firm. And if there's a lot of browning and mushy,
Brown and mushy, yeah.
I would cut them off.
Cut
Yeah.
them off.
And then
And put
I'd
it back
repot
in new
it.
soil and see if new growth comes.
Would you repot it in new soil?
Yeah, I would do
Yeah.
that too, because like, the thing is, if you ever pulled out a plant with root rot, it actually also smells kind of funky.
Yes.
Yeah, and
And-
the soil could have
Yep.
like bacteria growing in
So
it.
that's where you clear it out a little bit, maybe get rid of half of it, even all of it if it's really bad. Like, if the root rotting is occurring all over the root system, then yeah, you might want to get rid of most of the soil, put it into new soil. Maybe if the old soil was a really high proportion of peat moss and not very much perlite, like, add a bit more perlite to improve the drainage of it.
So if you were to have kind of a basic mix of soils, do you mix all of your soils when you...
I usually buy one pre-made indoor soil type of thing, and then I have a separate bag of just perlite. Perlite is those little white foamy bits.
Yes.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
when you add that into peat moss, then that's where you get your typical looking soil, which is mostly like brown with some white dots in it.
Yes.
When you add more perlite, you're essentially creating more air
Aeration.
spaces. Yeah, but then you're also lowering the amount of water that the soil can hold, right?
Right.
So it depends on the plant, right?
Yes, yes.
So Kimmy Roberts from our Gardenstead houseplant group says, got this snake plant and another, looks really nice, over the weekend. Any tips for a first timer? A little background, I'm a chronic waterer. I need help with a watering schedule and any other tips you're willing to share in general. So already, first step, you have to rewind being a chronic waterer with a snake plant because they will not do well if you are watering.
I see someone's responded to
much.
her saying water every 2 weeks. I'm like, no, that's not correct.
So here's the thing. Whenever someone wants a watering schedule, it's because they want to not think about when to water, right?
Yeah.
But that just does not work for a plant, because everybody's window situation is different. Therefore, everybody's plants will use up the soil moisture at a different rate, right? So
Yeah.
even if you said you don't water your snake plant over like several months at a time,
Yeah.
but it's fine because it's probably not growing super fast, like it's not in the sun getting baked, right? So because of this, the approach to understanding watering has to be, I have to know when to water it, and so I'm looking for a cue. And for a snake plant, the cue is that the soil has been absolutely completely dry.
Okay. Bone dry.
Bone dry. And
Bone
then
dry.
the person's asking for tips in general. I'll say this. First, you got to put your plant right up against whatever window you have. The purpose of this is that you want to make sure that the plant is looking at as much of the sky as possible. If you put a plant far from your window, the view of the sky is like this tiny little, like very small, right? Because you're far away from it. And the plant is just not going to be working, right? So once it's in front of the window, now you can be sure that the plant is doing its photosynthesis work.
Right.
And now because its engines are going, now you can go and water it whenever you detect that the soil is completely dry.
Right.
And I'm not going to say when that's going to be.
Yes.
You need to look at it.
Yes. Yes. Observe, observe, observe.
Yeah.
Because a plant's food is not fertilizer, it's not water. A plant's food is light.
Yes. Yes. I think actually a really good way to look at it is that the plant itself is like a little cookie factory, and the cookie is made out of water and carbon dioxide. And the only way that it gets put together is by, I guess you could say, a solar-powered oven, right? It's got to have light, and it's got to be at the right temperature, or not temperature, but like the right intensity, so that reaction can happen. And it's got to keep happening every day, on for whatever 12 hours, off for another 12 hours, right?
So one thing that I've learned from you is hashtag what my plant sees. So this is to me such a simple way of thinking about light and the relationship with my plant. I actually duck down and look up to the sky for what my plant is, and see like what part of the sky can I see? Can it see?
Yeah.
But I know that you have an engineer brain and you are more measurable in your ways.
So in fact, the guideline that I came up with, let your plant see as much of the sky as possible, it is because I first went around with this thing here, which is a light meter. And what I did was I walked around my house and I turned on my light meter and I said, okay, how much light is this spot getting? And then I walked 2 feet closer to the window and realized, wow, the number just jumped up like double, right? And the thing is, our human eyes are meant to normalize and adjust to all brightnesses just so that we can see and identify objects. But for a plant, every intensity difference in the light translates to I can do less photosynthesis or more, right?
Yeah.
So that's why, it's very obvious when the sun is shining directly on a spot. That's very intense light, and if I was to measure it, it would be like anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 foot candles, right? That's just the unit of measure for, what's one unit of measure for light. But then when the sun's not shining on it, then I ask myself, I still get a number here, but it's changing a lot even though I move, to and from closer and farther from the window. And then I said, well, why is this number changing so much? And it's because the view of the sky is getting narrower. Like you move back and the view gets narrower. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on this thing to the light meter mode, right?
Okay.
And so right now, this sensor is what I'm reading. So here, there, 200 foot candles. And then I turn it towards outwards, and the number gets higher. It's like now it's like up to 400, right? If you want to grab this, you can move it farther back from there, and the number slowly gets smaller.
Interesting.
Right? Now, that's like what I get when I measure it. But here, now what I've done is I've now attached a camera that has what's called a fisheye lens. And so now you're looking at what this sensor is looking at, right? So here, this is the view of the sky.
That's so cool.
Right? And it tells you that, okay, right now I see like this patch of the sky giving me this much. If I stick my hand in front, it already lowers the light intensity a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yeah.
So now you can think about this. Do you have a window that's this size in your house? No, right? You're covered here and here. So that's why even every inch that you move farther from the window is constricting this view of the sky, lowering the number that I get here.
Wow.
Right? So that's why when you make a guideline, it's got to be just simple to follow and applicable in as many situations as possible. So that's why if I say to you, let your plants see as much of the sky as possible, it means find your biggest window, and just put all your plants where they're looking out as much of the sky as possible. It's because of this situation. If you put a snake plant far from, like, on a couch far away from the window, if I was to measure it, I could say, like, okay, well, it's getting 50 foot candles back there. But if you take the guideline and say, oh, how much of the sky is it seeing? Well, it's this much.
Yeah, that's...
It also, it lines up with the measurement, right? And that's what I wanted to achieve by saying, let your plant see as much of the sky as possible.
Yeah.
That's really impressive. I never think of, like, seeing the sky. I think, like, direct rays into the house, but that's not really the point. The rays, it's not seeing the sky.
The seeing the sky part is only half the story. The other half talks about, now, when the sun does shine directly on this spot, now you have to consider whether this plant can tolerate it for
Direct
X
sun,
number of hours, right?
Yeah.
So with those two things, hours of direct sun exposure plus the visible sky, now you can understand why, like, oh, why is it that I put a plant outside and people call this shade, but it's still so bright here? It's because the view of the sky is unobstructed, but the rays of the sun are blocked for most hours of the day.
Right.
Whereas indoors, you're going to have, like, one window, the sun crosses the path for 2 hours, but then another maybe taller window, the sun will still only cross it for 2 hours, but why is it brighter? Because more of the sky is visible to that spot.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming, Darryl.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Interesting.
So much insight into the houseplant world, and you're just a joy to have around.
Yes.
Thank you.
An absolute genius, houseplant genius.